Welcome to FFRF's Ask An Atheist. I am Andrew Seidel, the Director of Strategic Response here at the Freedom from Religion Foundation. I'm astounded by people who have the intellectual honesty, courage, and fortitude to examine their most deeply held beliefs. Not just examine, but challenge and reject beliefs that shape how their entire world is constructed. Beliefs that they were told were unequivocally true by their most trusted sources since they were little. Beliefs that have been deliberately and systematically ingrained. The reverse of indoctrination, the process of systematically pulling apart those beliefs, is sometimes called deconstructing. And deconstructing is having something of a media moment right now. And this gives me hope for our species because it shows that humans are capable of the intellectual courage and honesty that our species needs, but which is far too rare. So that is how I begin my latest article for Religion Dispatches, which was just up on the screen there. It's called A Love Letter to Exvangelicals and Those Deconstructing Their Toxic Faith. Now, you can get it at that link right there, ffrf.us/exvangelicals, not evangelicals, exvangelicals. Now, I didn't know that I was hosting this show until just a little while ago, but I wanted some help to talk about this. So when I found out that I was going to go do live TV with basically no notice, I thought I'd better reach out to someone with a bit more experience, more gravitas, and velvety goodness in his voice. So I reached out to my good friend Seth Andrews, and he is joining me today. Seth, welcome back to Ask an Atheist.
It's a pleasure to be here. I don't know that I'm going to add all that much. I'm just one of those, I'm like a party favor. Just bring me on and we'll just liven things up just a little bit.
Yeah,
but I can talk about deconstruction all day, man.
I know you can. You and I, we just happened to be texting already, so it was kind of perfect timing. Right as I found out I was doing this, I was already texting with you.
Yeah, it's I think I've done whole broadcast, and I do a weekly podcast, but I've done whole podcasts where we talk to lifelong atheists,
Mm-hmm.
and I think many of them must look at us like, what's wrong with you? Why did it take you so long? Well, this is basic. This is an easy one, And so I've spent a lot of the past dozen years trying to educate's not the word I'm looking for, but to try to paint that picture for the lifelong non-believer as to what it's like, what it's like to be a part of the culture and how difficult it often is to get out.
Yeah, I think that's crucially important, and that's one of the things I was trying to do with this letter. Now, before we dive in a little more, if you have questions today, folks, and I hope that you do, please ask them right here in the comments on Facebook, or you can send an email to askanatheist@ffrf.org. And for the few of you who don't know about Seth, he is a former Christian, a former Fox News Christian, a former radio host, a current podcaster, a YouTube star. The hugely popular show, The Thinking Atheist, is Seth's show. He's also the author of several books, including Deconverted, A Journey from Religion to Reason, which we were kind of just talking about, Sacred Cows, a lighthearted look at belief and tradition around the world, which I really enjoyed, and most recently, Confessions of a Former Fox News Christian. And I loved that, and I was just rereading it this past weekend to quote it in a project that I am working on. So go like and subscribe to his work. And Seth, I mean, I wrote a love letter to you. That's really what this is. This was to you and to everybody who has had the intellectual courage and fortitude to question those deeply held beliefs that were ingrained in them when they were, young and impressionable and didn't have maybe the skills to question.
You've got, these young, impressionable kids like me, and the same people that tell you, don't talk to strangers, or, don't take candy from strangers. Don't, look both ways before you cross the street, and to say please and thank you. And the same people who provide food and shelter and security and protection, and who are essentially your mentors for living. These same people they're the ones who tell you that there is a being in the sky, an all-seeing being that is always watching, even when no one else can see you. God can see you. And Adam and Eve existed in the garden, and Noah built an ark, and Christ came to die on the cross, and you were born a sinner, and all those things. And that kind of early blind trust that children often have really fosters some real damage later on in life. I didn't feel like I had damaged ideas when I was a devout believer. I thought, well, how lucky am I?
Mm-hmm.
I was born in the right part of the country, to the right religion, to the right denomination, worshiping the right God for the right reasons, and all those other delusional slobs, they're totally wrong. How pathetic and pitiful for them. I'll pray for you, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's also a reinforcement culture, Andrew, where everybody around you is the same.
Yeah.
The way they sort of cordon you off. So your friends are Christian, your parents' friends are Christians. My school was a Christian school. The music we listened to was Christian. The T-shirts we wore, the cross necklaces on my sisters, were always, it's just everywhere you look. And the idea of not believing it became such an anomaly, so abnormal, such an aberration that we would have never considered it.
Well,
we didn't even stop to think about atheism.
And that's the thing that I find so interesting and frustrating from the perspective of the lifelong non-believer, right? Is religion has so many mechanisms built into it deliberately to keep people from questioning, from doubting. Shunning non-believers, encouraging interfaith marriage and discouraging, encouraging intra-faith marriage and discouraging interfaith marriage. Having only one book, excluding other books. Having the Christian schools, constantly reinforcing the message every week at church. People talk about this God-shaped holiness, which I think the weekly need to go to church to keep people in the faith kind of really disproves. But for me, all those mechanisms that are built into religion to keep people in the faith is a reason that I have so much regard, and I'm so impressed by people like yourself who are able to question and set themselves free. Because this is a system that is designed to keep you in and gets you when you are young and impressionable.
It's difficult when I first became an atheist and then segued into activism, because that is my nature. Like, I've always been a crusader. I was a crusader in the faith. I was a crusader out of the faith. I've always been that guy, But I used to have this naive belief that when I went to the people who were still in Christianity, and I showed them this list of bullet points, that they would be like, well, that's amazing that you've discovered this. Why have I never seen it before? And there would be white light from the sky and music and glitter, and we would all lock arms and go, gallivanting off into Reasonville together, and they would slough off these bad ideas. And of course, that just never happened. And I really became interested in why I think people love church, but many times they love church because they love community.
Yeah.
And say what you will about the
Absolutely.
church, but it does community really well.
It does.
So if I say, look, maybe this isn't true, maybe it doesn't historically, scientifically, and morally make any sense, I'm not really just asking them to walk away from an idea. The implications are, as all the dominoes fall, that they walk away from the people they get to see every Sunday and Wednesday, and the people they do Tuesday night fellowship with, and the activities that their children are involved with, and the support system when they're sick or in the hospital, and all the relationships are now on the bubble. I'm not saying you have to leave everything that you do and love, but many people feel a pressure. Like, if I'm not just disconnecting from an idea, this is a culture. And that reinforcement culture will often keep people shut down and locked away from the harder questions. And you're right, somebody who does give themselves permission, despite the consequences, to say, okay, I'm going to follow the breadcrumbs wherever they leave me, come hell or high water. That's a pretty big deal. When people call my show to talk about their own sort of deconstruction and journey, I'm a cheerleader. Oh my God, this is amazing. Think of this is a gift that you have given to yourself, the gift of living your life on your terms. And we don't say it enough, which is why I found the article that you wrote refreshing, because it wasn't just another Christian nationalists are insane and we've got to go to work against them, which is true, or at least the whole scenario is insane. Or religion is damaging, that we've been pounding that drum, but to say to the exvangelical, hey, you have done something that millions of people have not done, have not given themselves permission to do, and you deserve to be given some accolades and some encouragement for being able to do that. It's an amazing achievement,
It really is, I'm blown away by it personally, and that's what I wanted to do in this. I wanted to express support and awe at this. I mean, it truly is an astounding intellectual achievement. And Seth,
but you're like a lifelong atheist. I mean, when you look at somebody like me, I mean, don't you ever cock your head and just go, talking animals? Seth, come on, what's the matter with you?
No,
you
I really don't, because I was lucky. My mom, I think she's watching today. Hi, Mom. I was just texting with her before the show. My mom was very much into, hey, you should question all authority, including me. If your teacher says something wrong, you should ask them, why they said it, or go after them, prove them wrong. So I was never saddled with any of these beliefs. She encouraged me to go to mass with my Catholic friends. I went to a bar mitzvah. Apparently I came back from the bar mitzvah and said I wanted to convert to Judaism because it was the most fun I'd ever had. Great party.
You get presents.
Yeah.
You get goodies.
And I mean, it became very clear to me early on, right, that as opposed to one of these being right, they were probably all wrong. But I could see the kind of the community aspects and things like that. And to me, it's never, the fact that I never had to deal with this and never had to do it makes me wonder, not why it took you so long, but whether or not I would have had the courage and fortitude to do the same thing. And I would love to answer, yes, of course I would. Like, how could I not? Talking snakes, right? But when you think of all of the mechanisms that are there to keep you in the belief, and all of that pressure to keep you from leaving, I don't know that that's true at all. And I would really encourage anybody who is a lifelong non-believer to stop and pause and have a little bit of intellectual humility there, because I don't know that I could say that about myself. I'd love to be able to, but I'm not sure.
There's an aspect that we haven't yet covered, I think, which is how fear, selling fear, especially to young and impressionable children, really does keep many of them from, it kept me from asking a lot of questions. Here I am in my late 30s, and I'm finally walking away logically from the faith. This doesn't wash. This doesn't make sense. These verses don't add up. Everything's just a mess. But in my heart, for decades, I had carried this, what if I'm wrong? What if I screw this up? I'm going to burn. I hadn't yet been able to navigate the morality of hell or gotten into the history of hell, the mechanism of hell and how it's been written about in so many different incarnations and religions and for so many uses being control of people. But, I was really a wreck for a very long time. And often there are some people who never get over it, even though they logically know. And even though they'll say, well, I'm a non-believer, I'm an atheist or whatever, they still in their heart are scarred. They're scarred from being told for so long that if this one question is answered incorrectly, we're talking about fire and brimstone and screaming and torment and all those things. It's really insidious. It's one of the reasons I do what I do, to try to combat the indoctrination of young children, especially with hell theology. This whole tragic idea that, hey, you're born broken. Was it Hitchens who said, you are born sick and commanded to be well? And I like to really emphasize the positives, much like you did in the article that you just published. When I meet someone, especially someone who's a believer and they believe in a literal hell, I will tell them, you and I stand apart on this issue, but I want it on the record that I actually think more of you than you may think of yourself, because I don't think you're broken.
Yeah.
I don't think you've got a sin nature. I don't think you deserve torment for the sin of being born a descendant of Adam and Eve. I think you have value regardless. Even if there was no God tomorrow, to me, it doesn't make any difference. I think you have real worth. And it's amazing to see the looks on many of the faces, because it's not a response they expect. like a validating response.
Yeah.
They don't hear me saying, well, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, or that's obscene, or whatever. Instead, I say, well, actually, I think I've got a better opinion of you than you might have of yourself. I really see value in you. And they just stop and kind of blink at me blankly. And then often I'll get a big smile. So
I think you're right to hit on this too. I've talked to, for instance, FFRF conventions in the past. I've had people who come up to me who've been atheists for 40 or 50 years. And I remember this vividly. It was at our last Madison convention. A gentleman came up to me. He'd been an atheist for 50 years, and we were chatting, and he said, I still have nightmares about hell. I've been an atheist for longer than I was ever a believer, but it was ingrained in me at such a young age, and it was so vivid, and I was so impressionable that he'll still wake up every now and then in the middle of the night, shaking off a nightmare about eternal torture and torment, and not a believer by any stretch of the imagination now. But still has that, and I've had, that's just the one story that stands out to me. But I've heard similar things from many ex-evangelicals, ex-believers, and it's tragic and it's sad. And that's one of the things I'm trying to do in this article is offer support. And as we're talking, Seth, too, I'm thinking, this is one of the things that I think we in the secular movement fall down a little bit on. And I did try to touch on this later on in the letter as well. We do what you did, or the hypothetical you did. We have this list of bullet points. Here's all the reasons that belief in God is wrong or that religion is wrong, and expect that to be enough. And I think what we're revealing in this conversation is that, that's 10% of what is keeping people in a particular belief. And if we want to help, we have to provide all of these make up that other 90%, and give them give them support to help kind of question all of these things they've been taught for so long.
I have two major fronts that I've been focusing on recently. First of all, Dr. Ryan Cragen is a sociologist at the University of Tampa. And his research has shown that the number one determiner for helping to expand someone's horizons, change their perceptions, perhaps even change their minds, is not data points, but the changing of their social circles. Mm-hmm. So if somebody hears about me and they see a label, oh, Seth, atheist, it's easy to sort of wipe me off the table.
Yeah.
But if we are connected as human beings and we start talking, eye to eye, face to face, voice to voice, person to person, it's a lot harder to stick me in a box. It's a lot easier to find me a likable, relatable human being who may have much in common as far as shared values are concerned. It's like I'm on a tennis team, Andrew. We'll go out and we'll play. And some of the people I play tennis with will find out weeks, months later that I host the Thinking Atheist website and online community. And they're just, first of all, they get shocked, like, what? And then, but because they got to know me as a human being first, then they don't cast me off. Then maybe they're a little curious. Maybe we have some conversations over dinner. It's amazing to see the level of interest. It's a different dynamic. So that's Absolutely. The first front. The second front I've been really focusing on is I think we are going to change minds and reach people through stories.
Yes.
Human beings, it's funny, in the atheist movement, I see this desire to reject emotion. And I understand it because a lot of people were emotionally manipulated in the church. But what they've done is they've allowed the church to stamp a brand of ownership on something that is part of the human experience. And I always tell people it's okay to feel something about the things we think about. It's okay to have, it's not that emotion is the locomotive leading the train. The emotion is actually further back. We want to lead with reason wherever we can, but we are also emotional creatures. And we in the movement have such good stories of people who extracted themselves, or lifelong atheists who've had great experiences, or the story of how and why the Bible isn't accurate in any sense of the word. It's not reliable, and why there are so many better stories out there, the story of science, the story of reason, the story of humanism. And I think, if there's one need that we have in the movement that we could really focus on, it's going to have to be trying to tell our own stories and to help to translate and tell the stories of other people. And I think it is through storytelling and social interactions that we're going to really be able to make the most difference when it comes to changing minds and perceptions.
Yeah, I don't think it would be possible to agree with that more. I mean, we really are emotional creatures. I'm so glad you said that. And our emotions come from our brains. I mean, we make decisions based on our emotions all the time. It's a large part of our decision making. And for logical folks to write that off because they want to pay more attention to logic is illogical. And I'm so glad you brought that up. I really, that is something I think we need to focus on more. And it's part of the reason I wrote this. I wanted to offer emotional support and let folks know that when you are questioning and deconstructing like this, you're loved, and there's this awesome, huge community of people out there who want to hear your story and want to support you. Real quick side note, Dr. Ryan Cragen is a friend of FFRF, and he was on this show a couple weeks ago talking about Tax the Churches, and I think he's going to be on Free Thought Matters coming up soon as well, our television show.
Oh, that's a whole other nerve.
Yeah.
That's a whole other nerve to strike, Tax the Churches. Well, I'm a video producer as well as a podcaster, okay? So I sit down with an Exvangelical and they start talking about their journey out. And I could just put a camera on them and just leave it. Mm-hmm. But as a storyteller producer, what I like to do is move the camera, and I'll change to a second vantage, and I'll add support visuals. They talk about themselves as a young Muslim who was once devout in the Quran. We'll show photographs of them in the hijab. Or maybe it's somebody who is part of the Jesus movement, like Dave Warnock, and I'll transition to a photograph of him back in the Jesus movement in the 1970s. And I'll use emotive music to help draw people forward. There are some people who reject that and say, well, it's manipulative. And I agree with documentary filmmaker Ken Burns that all storytelling is in some way manipulation. Like, I am wanting to try to draw you forward into the story, right? But I'm not doing that disingenuously. I'm not lying to you. What I'm using is the tools of the storyteller to try to enhance the story, to make it more compelling, to make it more widely available and interesting to a larger marketplace, marketplace is not the word, a larger arena of ideas. And I think, it's okay. Like, I have emotions about the things that are important to me. I have feelings about the things that are important to me. And I think we in the atheist movement need to be able to say that's okay. We just have to prioritize them, to be aware of them, to be aware of the pitfalls and the fallacies and the ways they can lead us astray. But if we have that knowledge, to live our lives without being able to feel love, joy, compassion, empathy, anger, even rage at the injustices of the world, we've cheated ourselves out of a huge part of the human experience.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, humans are, again, emotional creatures. And if we pretend like that's not true, we are going to lose. We have to be emotionally intelligent rather than pretending that emotions don't exist. And I was just, as you were talking about Ken Burns and saying that too, I was trying to imagine what the Civil War documentary would look like, or how the experience would change without that slow violin playing. I can't imagine.
And he's a great example. Like, who would have thought a documentary about the Civil War using almost exclusively photos?
Yeah.
I mean, he does a few reenactments. It's just photos with a couple of keyframes for motion, and that it remains my favorite documentary of all time. Who would have thought that possible? So, what he did, though, with the Civil War is he took this thing that I learned about in the most dry of senses back when I was in school. Well, it was the North and the South, and it was about slavery, and there was Lincoln, and the Emancipation Proclamation. It was all this. I didn't take it personally. What Ken Burns allowed me to do was to feel something about this and to really begin to see the characters in the play and those types of things. And I'm a big fan of doing that when it comes to our cause, telling the stories of the Exvangelical, somebody who was deeply steeped. I just narrated a book for Dr. David Madison, former pastor. Oh, he's got a great story. He graduates from seminary. He's a Bible believer. He's preaching in the pulpit for 9 years. And during this journey, he's actually getting a PhD. But during his PhD studies, all of a sudden he starts to realize that this stuff doesn't make sense. It's not adding up. There's something wrong. Danger, danger, danger. And then he manages to not only extract himself from that, but to become an activist that is helping other people to do the same. That's a hell of a story.
Yeah.
And I think, he's a great example, an ex-evangelical who found the courage. It wasn't just a personal decision for him. This was his career. This was his livelihood. The consequences for him were, what happens to my mortgage? How do I feed my family? How do I take care of my life? And yet he found the fortitude, and he was creative and resourceful enough to be able to do a life 2.0 post-religion. And it's inspiring to me and a great many people.
It is. And I mean, those are a lot of the folks who are locked into that life, that if we can tell their stories, we can help, many others like them get out. And we've got actually a ton of questions rolling in that I've been neglecting, Seth. So I'm going to ask one. Jane Conrad says, evangelicals seem to live with a lot of fear. Are there any pointers for talking to them, specifically kind of related to that fear stuff that we were talking about?
Talking to them in what sense? Are we trying to assuage the fear?
It's a good question.
That would be my guess, I guess. Well, it is interesting that many of the people who believe in heaven are the ones most terrified of death. Have you noticed that?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Absolutely.
I'm going to the greatest place in the universe.
But I don't want to go there.
But I'm terrified. It's like the people who talk about Jesus coming back. I can't wait for the return of Jesus. But then whenever they see what would be a sign of the end times, according to their theology, they just wig. They just wig out, and they're like, oh, my God, it's the Antichrist. It's the sign of the end times. And I'm like, this is what you want. This is Jesus. This is a precursor to the second coming, those types of things. I mostly would speak words of assurance. Again, I think it would be a reflection of, I don't believe that even if God existed, that God would create a system of pain and suffering, whether it's hell or otherwise. I don't think that God would create a meat grinder that humankind is going through. I can't imagine a parent having a child, no matter how quote unquote disobedient that child was, and saying, okay, if you get this wrong, I'm going to douse you in gasoline and light a match and set you on fire, which is just a tiny little sliver of what hell would look like, for hell is eternity. And, I think if you placed it in a real world scenario like that, using a lot of positive language, you have value. You would not be punished by a worthy deity. I think it's going to be okay. I would lead with those words and see where that takes you in the conversation.
I think that makes sense. I always think it's worth doing to try to validate folks' feelings. So even though we're going to essentially say that the underlying idea here is erroneous, their feelings are not, right? I mean, again, flashback to the guy who's been an atheist for 50 years and still has nightmares about hell. Those feelings are real, even though the thing that he's afraid of is not. So I think it's important to kind of touch on that as well. James Farr asks, do you think that people who are raised religious have a different perspective on the secular movement once they deconvert?
Well, I think they bring an informed perspective about the faith into the secular movement. I find myself often educating non-believers about what it's like to be a believer. And a great example is pastors, and Dan Barker can speak to this. But there's this notion that, well, in the faith, the pastors, they're all cashing in, living tax-free with parsonage exemptions, and it's, they're rolling in the coin in the name of God, because in their mind, they think evangelists, they think Ken Copeland, they think Joel Osteen and his $10 million mansion, et cetera. But the truth is that the vast, vast, vast majority of pastors are people living on a very modest budget, who work extremely hard, who are on call 7 days a week, who are beautiful people who genuinely are doing what they feel is the right thing because they are literally honest to God believers. So I find myself educating people outside who are lifelong atheists about what the culture is like. It's not a binary thing. A lot of this is situational. A lot of believers are beautiful, wonderful, kind, generous, charitable, valuable people. And so I think you bring that perspective out of the faith, and it helps to inform how you interact. You may be a little more empathetic. You may be a little more charitable. If you feel burned, you might be a little angrier. I think it's situational depending on the person and the circumstances.
I mean, I think that's such a great point too, right? I mean, most Christians are better than Christianity. Most believers are better than their Bible. And I think there's a tendency to lose sight of that sometimes. And I think it goes back to what you were talking about too, which is once you can put a label on somebody, right, you can pigeonhole them and you can ignore the individual aspects of them. This is what happens when you're playing tennis with your friends and they know you're an atheist first. They just put you in that box and don't bother to investigate because they already know everything that's in that box.
Yeah, don't call that guy.
Yeah, but if they find out about that you're an atheist afterwards, you've already kind of broken down a lot of those barriers. And this is one of the things that I love personally trying to do. I have the opportunity working here at FFRF to go on some weird shows, some weird media. For instance, Jesse Lee Peterson is this really far out there right-wing radio host. I mean, not somebody I would recommend anybody listen to, and I've been on his show 4 or 5 times. And one of the things that I try to do on there is just simply be a happy, polite atheist. And he knows that I'm an atheist and has all these preconceived notions. He's got that box set up in his mind, and I'm not conforming to it. Because I'm happy and I'm polite. And just those two things, you can see the cognitive dissonance it creates on him. Like if you go watch some of these, it's really funny because he clearly can't get by the fact that I am this happy, nice guy, but I'm supposed to be this miserable, terrible human being because I don't believe in God. And I think that does more to get him and his viewers to question things than any point I will ever raise on that show.
I think that's one of the reasons why when some people, and I think a lot of people who come out of the faith, they're like, what can I do?
Yeah.
And my first piece of advice is if you were freshly out of the faith, take your time.
Yeah.
Because you may still be carrying those wounds. Was it Chrissy Stroop who said on my show a while back that, if you're an activist, do so from your scars, not from your wounds? Kind of thing. You really need to give yourself time to get out and get some perspective, calm down maybe just a little bit. So when you do get angry, it's not that you were just totally keyed up kind of thing. But as you come out of the faith, I think you are, I just totally lost my train of thought at that moment.
Well, I want to say too that Chrissy actually was a really big help on this letter. I shared an early draft with Chrissy. She offered her comments. I shared an early draft with Dan Barker. He offered his comments. And so I mean, I ran this by some folks because I wanted to be supportive, right? I didn't want to seem patronizing or like I was talking down to anybody. I wanted to offer actual support, and not having come from this background and not having had to do this, huge intellectual weightlifting, I wanted to make sure that I was not kind of talking down to anybody.
The thought really has returned to me, by the way. I was sitting here as you were opining. I was like, aha. By the way, this happens to me more and more. Like, do you ever walk into your room and go, why did I walk into this room?
Yeah,
I looked from my glasses the other day as they were resting on the top of my head, 15 minutes of me going from room to room. So this is happening more and more as I age. Many people will ask me, what can I do? Because I think they want to make a difference. Yeah. So, I've got to start a podcast, or I've got to write a blog, or I've got to do this. And one of my big things is, without really trying to deconstruct somebody else, right, disenfranchise somebody else from their faith, for lack of a better word, just live your own life loud and proud. Mm-hmm. If your friends and your neighbors and your coworkers and your associates and total strangers who have been raised to believe that atheists are these sad, pathetic, immoral, or at least amoral, rudderless, awful people, they discover you're an atheist and they look at you and they're like, well, look, they love life
Yep.
and they love their family and they smile all the time. What a great sense of humor. And they seem to have a lot of purpose and joy. And man, they're just extracting the marrow from every single day. They start to tilt in their brain because these two things clash against each other. You are changing their perceptions of what an atheist is. And you did that without sitting in their living room going, well, let's talk about the book of Genesis, right? Because you don't necessarily have to do that to help change perceptions. A lot of times you just have to be you. Be you at your volume on your terms for the reason you choose. And as people watch this, their curiosity becomes piqued. And that is also a place where conversations can begin. And in those cases, if they come to you, they're less on the defensive because they did so on their own terms.
Absolutely.
They're like, hey, tell me about this. It's not like you accosted them. It's like they saw a crack in the door and they willfully walked through it. And man, those conversations can be amazing.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. That's one of the things, when I used to be able to go around the country and travel and do talks, that was how I would end my talk, because it's probably the most frequent question I hear is, what can I do to help? And really, the number one thing people can do is to just come out of the closet and openly and honestly live their life as a non-believer is going to do more to help the secular movement than just about anything else, for the reasons that you just articulated.
You're an atheist? I mean, you're such a nice guy.
How many times have I heard that?
You're such a nice guy. What a shock.
So here's a question that I really want to get to. Chelsea asks, a lot of atheists I see online seem to disregard anyone who brings up faith or religion as stupid or misguided. But don't we need more progressive believers to work with us against Christian nationalism and extremism?
Yes. I've been guilty of the cheap shot. But there are some terrible approaches by atheists and atheist activists when it comes to religion. Some of the ones I hate the most, there's an atheist acronym that's thinking something. It's one of those things where if you're an atheist, you're automatically a creature of great reason. You are enlightened, and the rest of the slobs out there are just too stupid to get it. Another one that I just despise, religion is a mental illness.
Yes.
It's not. It just makes my blood boil. It is not. Religion is an idea, and hugely intelligent, thoughtful, and reasonable people have a religious faith, kind of thing. I also agree that if we're going to do battle against the agents for Christian nationalism, this sort of evangelical co-opting of the entire country, we're going to have to partner in an interfaith capacity with people like evangelist Tony Campolo. He is part of an organization called Christians Against Christian Nationalism. And they're on our side on this issue. He believes in God, but he doesn't think God needs to make it the letter of the law. We don't need a theocracy. My Jesus doesn't need "in God we trust" on the money. Well, he and I may hugely disagree on theology and on the God question, but we line up totally on the fact that the Establishment Clause exists to protect the state from the church and the church from the state. We line up there, and I think we have to expand our tent to be able to join forces with those people if we're going to affect positive change against the Christian nationalists.
Absolutely. I mean, I will take any help we can get fighting people who are willing to abuse their public power to promote their personal religion. Anybody who wants to help me stop that, bring it on.
Rachel Laser up at Americans United for Separation of Church and State, right? I mean, she comes from the Jewish faith.
Yep, and we work with AU all the time, and Rachel, I talk with Rachel pretty regularly. They do fantastic work. Of course,
I just interviewed, I'm sorry, Andrew, forgive me.
Go ahead.
A little bit of a delay. I just interviewed Kristen Dumais. That interview is going to air in a few weeks. She wrote the new book called Jesus and John Wayne. Now, she is an absolute Christian. She's an absolute God believer. But she has written an entire book criticizing Christian nationalist culture. And whenever she and I were talking, I'm like, I think you and I constitute like an interfaith ministry or something. I don't know what else to call it. But we are on the same page. This whole co-opting of the United States to act like a church is actually antithetical to our very own Constitution. She's a devout believer, and she gets that. So the short answer is yes. We need to be less divisive on this issue. We need to find greater opportunities to connect with those who may disagree theologically, but we agree on the Constitution.
Absolutely. And I want to touch on the stupid and misguided portion of that question too, because this is just an absolute pet peeve of mine. I really, really hate to see atheists saying that believers are somehow stupid or intelligent for believing. I can't stand it, to be honest. Stop that. Don't do that. First of all, it's not true, right? Like, Seth, you were a believer. The day you changed your mind, you didn't gain 50 IQ points, right? Like, you just changed your mind about an idea. It's a very tenacious idea, and it has a lot of defense mechanisms, and there was a lot of emotion rolled into that change, but all you did was change your mind. You didn't get rid of a mental illness, and you didn't gain 50 IQ points overnight. I can't. It sets religion up on. It does a lot of the work for religion to suggest that people can't leave their faith behind without being as smart as you are. You're helping religion by pushing that narrative, by saying that people need to be cured of a mental illness. You're helping religion by saying that they need to get smarter. You're helping religion. Why are you doing that? I'm going to calm myself down a little bit and back off on this one. But yeah, I mean, don't do that. And certainly don't do that. Don't do that on any of my social media pages.
Francis Collins, Dr. Collins, head of the Human Genome Project, he's a Christian. And he's a genius. I mean, in his field, he is, talk about an intelligent guy. I throw this one out, Andrew, and this usually stops all conversation for about 10 seconds as people gasp. And then, but I do it strategically for a reason. I'll hear, well, those idiot people who believe in God, how stupid are they? And I'll look them in the eye and politely I will say, well, you're talking about my wife. Because my wife is kind of a deist. She believes in a God. And, it's provided some moments of very interesting conversation. It has its challenges. But my wife is, she's a hugely intelligent and kind and good and amazing and worthy person. So when someone says that and then I personalize it, so it's no longer in the abstract, but now you're talking about not just a flesh and blood human being, but someone who I love dearly. You can see that all of a sudden has switched something in their minds, and they will realize what they have said and done, usually, and be like, well, okay, all right, hang on just a second. What I meant was, and it causes everybody to start de-escalating. I do it strategically. I don't do it often. But I think let's humanize each other, and we will, I think, take great strides toward things together whenever possible. I
mean, most of the non-believers I know and the people the people that I wrote this letter to, right, have deconstructed. They were once believers. I mean, to suggest that is just, it's so far out there, in my opinion. And again, it does a lot of the work of religion. I mean, and Dan Barker is another great example. I mean, he's probably one of the smartest people that I've actually met in real life, and brilliant, and was in the clergy. Was a traveling preacher, and now is an atheist activist. And again, didn't get smarter, didn't become a genius overnight. Changed his mind about some very core ideas, and is now helping.
And speaking to your article, I think that experience in the faith is one of the reasons that ex-evangelicals are often the most effective. At helping to promote the cause of leaving Christianity. They can say, I was there. Yes. I know what it's like. I sang the songs. I went to, youth group. We went to the singles ministry. I was at addiction recovery in the church. I tried this. I did that. We sang the songs. I used to work in Christian radio. This is one of the things where people talk about the culture, and that's my past. I was a Christian radio host. And I speak Christian. Like, I get it. I know what that language is. And that opens up a lot of opportunities for common ground. And I think, you're no longer the outsider as much because I was there. I know what it's like. And those people, I think, who come out of the faith often have a greater tool set for those types of conversations. So as things calm down, as they are then able to act from their scars more than their wounds kind of thing, and they're able to go influence the culture, they can actually draw upon that history to make them more effective today and tomorrow.
And I think that's a great place to end it, because I agree that ex-evangelicals and ex-believers have just so much to offer the secular movement if we are willing to listen to their stories and raise up their voices. So Seth, thank you so much for taking the time to join me on short notice. I really appreciate it, my friend.
No, you bet. You know, I'm one of you and I are the two of those people that we could probably sit over a cup of coffee and 3 hours would pass like that, you know. So it's nice to be able to, we can do it and share the table with everybody else. I think that's absolutely fantastic. Thanks for the invite, my friend.
Oh, it was my pleasure, as always. And thank you, everybody, for watching. That is our show, Ask an Atheist, for this week. Please go pick up a copy of Seth's latest book and tune into his YouTube channel and podcast. Go like, go subscribe, go share, all that fun stuff. If you want more information about the Freedom from Religion Foundation, please go to FFRF.org. Check out our website. Join us. We need all the support we can get right now. And we will be back next Wednesday at noon Central Time for another episode of FFRF's Ask an Atheist.